Hello, English Literature 2 class. This is Professor Steve Donner coming to you in a video. That's King Mindigus the Bear, if you're interested. He lives in my house. And I just wanted to say hello to all of you and talk to you a little bit about John Keats and Mary Shelley. So John Keats is too huge a subject to do in this difficult video format. Some of you have been chiming in with some great points. Tyler, I really appreciated your point about when I have fears that I may cease to be. Some of you are interested in To a Nightingale, I know, an ode on a Grecian urn. I hope you'll also look at my favorite Keats poem, Eve of St. Agnes, which is kind of a Romeo and Juliet story. It's a little bit long, but it's wonderful, and it deals with some aesthetic ideas that are very important to me. The idea of tension, that great art requires tension. And the poem begins in a cold winter evening on January 20th, when you can see your breath rise as smoke in the air, and you can see people in a darkened chapel praying because death seems to be so close. And in this world of death and darkness, Keats will set the most beautiful and warm love story I think I've ever read. It's the story of a girl named Madeline and a boy named Porphyro. And Madeline is dreaming of her future marital bliss. She loves a boy named Porphyro. She knows that. But on St. Agnes Eve, a young girl, if she fasts and says her prayers and follows all of the ritual, including not to look behind her over her shoulder, goes right to bed, she is supposed to receive a vision of her future marital bliss. And that's a very interesting setup, because Porphyro this very night has snuck into the castle, and he's like Romeo. He's the son of an enemy, and he's not supposed to be there. And if they find him in the castle, he'll be killed. But he goes and sneaks into Madeline's room, hides in a closet, and then as she comes in, she doesn't look behind her, and he pants. He can't believe that he sees her, and she undresses, and she gets into the bed, and he keeps his eyes down because he's sort of ashamed, and so he doesn't exploit her. But then he comes out of the bed, and he brings a lute, and he brings platters full of food and candies and citrons and nuts and dates and all sorts of wonderful things. And he puts this breakfast in bed all around her, and then he plays the lute for her, and she won't wake up. She keeps snoring, and she keeps in this deep sleep. And finally, Madeline awakens, and she looks at Porphyro, and the text says that she beheld the image of her dream. So she was dreaming of Porphyro, and then she woke up and she found her dream to be true. This is a Keatsian idea called Adam's dream, where Adam was put into a great sleep by God because he was longing for someone to complete him. And as he ached and ached and ached and longed in pain, God said, listen, I'll put you to sleep. And then he took a rib out of Adam, and then Adam woke up and he saw Eve, what he was dreaming about. And so this is a reverse gender version of the story of Adam and Eve in this way. So at the end of the play, Porphyro and Madeline decide to escape this place, and they wonderfully go down through the castle, and there's a big drunken party going on, but everybody's passed out, and they make their way past the giant hound, and they open the doors, and they go out into the storm to live happily ever after, perhaps. And this romantic poem is about that tension. It's about how love endures in this world of pain and suffering, and it's about how oftentimes our dreams can be made real. That's the idea of the imagination. Another Keats poem that's really crucial for our class is La Belle Dame sans Merci, which is not about imagination that makes something real, but it's about fantasy that can never be fulfilled. That's about loving a false image, like the poster of a model on your wall or something like that. You fall in love with that poster or pornography image on the internet, and you never have a real relationship. You never actually learn to love another human being, because your mind is obsessed with images that can never be fulfilling. If you listen to a song, which I really recommend, Paul Simon's Kodachrome, the second verse of the song says, if you took all the girls I knew when I was single and had them all together for just one night, they would never match my sweet imagination, and everything looks worse in black and white. In the song Kodachrome, he's talking about how the imagination always exceeds what we want and what we could have. We could have happiness right here, right now. We could choose to just be happy with what we have, but our capacious imaginations keep forcing us to go further. And this is where discontent comes from, and why we suffer. So that's some wonderful thoughts about, wonderful poems by Keats, and some thoughts about them. And I want you to think about Keats and Ode on a Grecian Urn and all the wonderful things we've done. The other major work that we're looking at is Frankenstein. And some of you have already pointed this out, but there are some really wonderful, disturbing things written in Frankenstein. This novel, this Gothic romance, or perhaps science fiction novel, written by 18-year-old Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley might have only been 18 years old when she wrote it. She probably started when she was almost 17, almost 18 years old. It was published when she was 19. And so this kid, you could say, wrote this incredible novel, one of the greatest novels in English literature. But at 18, she'd already had 2 miscarriages. She'd already run away from her father with the great poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. She was setting trends that nobody could believe in the year 1816, and so at the same time as Jane Austen, the Regency, the time of Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood, you've got this very naughty young woman named Mary Shelley, who is a genius by every standard and can write like nobody's business. And so you want to take a look at this book. Some of you have pointed out that chapter 4 in the readings that we looked at deals with some nightmarish imagery. He brings the creature to life, and he saw the yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. And immediately, he's horrified by his creation. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? He'd worked for 2 years to bring this thing to life, and he's immediately sickened by it. He can't look at the thing that he labored to create. This is why some people think that Frankenstein suffers from postpartum depression, that he's a mother and doesn't know it, because after going through labor, he rejects his baby. He rejects the creature and thinks it's horrible and can't look at it, though it came from him. It is a magnification of his own mind. It's what he created. And so where else did it come from but him? He is the mother and the father of the creature, and yet he can't abide it. And so he has to run away from it. So he runs back to his room, and there he falls in a great lassitude on his bed, or lazy, or sleep comes upon him, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, that's his fiancée, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. Well, that's quite an imagination, to reach out to embrace your fiancée and then have her change into your mother, your dead mother, and then to see the dead worms eating her flesh. That's a very disturbing way to start a book. This is chapter 4. This is probably the thing that Mary Shelley wrote that night with Byron and Percy Shelley, when they were all played a game and tried to write ghost stories. And the great writers Shelley and Byron failed, and only Mary Shelley and another fellow, Dr. Polidori, were able to write good books out of that famous night. Well, she probably started with this chapter 4, the creation of the creature, and then wrote the rest of the book around it, the earlier chapters and the later chapters, and the frame for the book. And this amazing chapter shows that Frankenstein is haunted by images of a mother. Well, so is Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley was her whole life haunted by the image of her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, um, who was the greatest woman writer of her generation. She was the founding voice of feminism. She wrote Vindication on the Rights of Women, and she was a war correspondent during the French Revolution. No women were war correspondents at that time. And so interestingly enough, Mary Wollstonecraft was this super heroic mother that Mary Shelley had, and she died 9 days after Mary Shelley was born of childbed fever. And with that, Mary Shelley lived her whole life in the shadow of this great woman. She would eventually become greater because almost everybody knows who Mary Shelley is today, and few people know Mary Wollstonecraft, her mother. But at the time of her life, her mother was far greater than she was. And so Mary Shelley grew up, and she became kind of a maverick child who disobeyed her father, ran away, eloped with her husband, wasn't quite married to Percy Shelley when she was living with him at the Via Diodati in Switzerland when she wrote this story, and she would eventually marry him. She even writes in manuscript that her, the name MWS, which is Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, that would become her name, but it isn't her name yet. As you go through the book, the sections I've given you, look at the character of the creature. Look what he's like. He's actually very literate and intellectual, very sensitive being who feels rejected by life and by his own parent. Well, that's a lot like Mary Shelley. In fact, the model for the creature could be Mary Shelley. The model for the creature could also be Lord Byron, who also has suffered and had the kind of rage issues that the creature has. The other thing I want you to notice is the creature is a baby. I mean, he might be 8 feet tall and gigantic size and nightmarishly forged together from dead tissues. But when he comes to the room, here's the description. It says, he wakes up from that horrible dream and he sees the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He's a baby. There's a possibility that Mary Shelley is writing the creature to seem like a baby reaching out to his mother. But Frankenstein doesn't know he's a mother, and so that's part of the problem. He's also a very interesting character. He's obsessed with his victories. His name is Victor Frankenstein, right? He's obsessed with conquering, obsessed with pursuit of dreams and goals, but he's not able to slow down and think about his own creations and reflect upon the lives of loved ones around him. And this might be his great failing, and it might be the great failing of romanticism itself. So as you look through the passages of Frankenstein, think about that sometimes if we don't take care of our children, they become revolutionaries and terrorists, and they come back to cause a French Revolution. Think about that. Think about what the creature really represents, and I'll talk to you about this in the discussion board. Thank you. Have a great night.